Okay, today we're going to look at the landmarks of Waterton Lakes. And they came across the prairies. They're looking for names to name. They had to name every 6 miles of the track. They had to name the rivers. They had to name the mountains. My God, where are they going to find all these names? Well, just so happened the First World War had ended, and there were lots of names of soldiers that had contributed to the war effort, and Waterton Lakes got named after a lot of these people. Also, a lot of the people that worked on the boundary between the United States and Canada. So let's look at some of these. First of all, in this picture you can see Mount Vimy and Mount Boswell. Vimy is one of the major battles of the war, and Dr. Boswell was a veterinarian with the International Boundary Survey. And moving on, when I went to Y Camp back in the 40s, I learned about the First World War because we used to travel over to the Dardanelles, which of course was a big scene in the First World War, and we talked about it, got the names. Moving on, Bosphorus, another name from the war, and you can see that it was straits between I think it's the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, along the Turkish border. And in March 1915, the British and French forces launched the ill-fated naval attack on the Turkish forces at the time. Anyway, let's move on. We come to Mount Alderson, and this was named after Lieutenant Alderson, who was commander of the Canadian Expeditionary Forces. I think he was the first fellow that ever was in charge of the Canadian, and normally it was the British until later on when the Canadians proved themselves and they are allowed to have their own leaders. Carthew, this particular man had surveyed the Waterton Lakes area and then went off to war and died, and it was suggested that they name a mountain in the area that he had surveyed. So you have Carthew Creek, Lake, and Mountain. Avion Ridge, a little more difficult to figure out exactly how that happened, but it could be it was named, the mountain looked like a plane. Others say that it was because it was named after a French village in the area that the soldiers had been fighting. Then we move on to Vestubert Mountain, again a site of the attack during the First World War. Now I suggest you just stop, and when you're tired of listening to me, just read through all this area and get the background of the pictures. In this case, it's Sir George Richards, who was head of the British Boundary Commission in the Rockies, and he got this beautiful mountain named after him. Then there's Crypt Lake. If you've been up to Crypt Lake, you've gone through the Wilson Range. Wilson was the secretary of the Boundary Commission, and a whole mountains area around Crypt Lake is named the Wilson Range. Upper and Lower Roe Lakes, again, you had Lieutenant Frederick Roe, a Royal Engineer with the British Boundary Commission, and he was assistant astronomer. Moving on, we have Captain or Major General Cameron, who was a surveyor of the Canadian-U.S. border from Lake of the Woods to the Rocky Mountains. Some more geologists. Mount Bowerman was a geologist. Anderson Peak, he was a chief astronomer. You had Mount Hawkins. These were all people that were involved in the Boundary Commission, marking the 49th parallel back in the mid-1800s. Cameron Lake. We see Mount Custer at the end of the lake. Beautiful mountain. How did it get its name? Well, I used to think it was because of the Custer Battle. Since he was an American, that part is in the United States. It only seemed reasonable. It was named after the big Indian fighter, but not so. It was named after Henry Custer, a topographer who worked with the U.S. Boundary Survey team, because at that particular time there were the American people checking out the 49th parallel on one side, The British were checking it out and getting measurements on the north side, and then they would get together and they would find exactly their agreement as to where the 49th parallel was. That was the story.